Hey guys, welcome to this week's edition of our sermon follow-up video / home group intro video. This week, Pastor Brian is going to be sharing with us. We hog-tied Gordon, threw him in a closet, and then we drew straws, and Brian is preaching this week. And we're about halfway into our sermon series, Glorious Mystery, and this week, Pastor Brian's going to unpack Acts 4:32 through 5:11. And it's a great passage. Obviously, they all are, but let me ask, Brian, could you give us sort of just a high-level kind of bird's-eye view, overview of this week's message and some of the main points that you want to kind of drive in?
Yeah, one of the things that's been great as we've started this is we've looked at, a lot of the apostles and what they're doing and how it's encouraging people. Now we're going to kind of be introduced to some new people who were part of the church initially. And we're going to look at, as they're there, we just talked last week about the fact of, hey, here's these guys. Who are they? Like, how are they able to do this ministry? But yet, they go back to the people, and there's this interesting gap that we're going to kind of touch on to show the transition. Obviously, this says they went to prayer. Prayer was foundational for what they did. And then the moment they prayed, the whole place shook, which would be pretty sweet.
That's cool.
And then after they prayed, the people were spurred to action. And as I read over the passage and thought about that, it wasn't necessarily generosity that, even though we're going to look at that, it was the unity that they had in that everyone was doing it. And so we're going to look at the example. Obviously, we talked about Barnabas, and we talked about Ananias and Sapphira. And Barnabas, here's this guy, and as I alluded to, Luke would introduce people and then always bring them back later on and kind of go more detail, and he does that with Barnabas later on in the book of Acts. But then we find that here's a guy that sold a piece of property that he had, gave it all, laid it at the apostles' feet, and then the apostles distributed that money to the people and helped them out. And then here's what's interesting. Ananias and Sapphira, it hit me as I was reading it in preparation for this week and praying over it. As I've always thought of that passage, it's like, here's a couple that just messed up. What were they thinking? What were they doing? It's a passage we looked at when we talked about the Trinity because of the way it talks about God and the Spirit. But what's interesting is they were doing what everyone else was doing. They gave. They sold their property and they gave. The difference was, and they didn't have to give. That wasn't a requirement. They chose it. But what they did differently was they gave just a portion. In other words, we have all this money. How about we not give it all? And they were in agreement with that. And of course, if you were with us, you heard the results of their actions and what happened to them. And so that, to me, in the passage, how does that look in our own lives? Because obviously we're called to give still today, and above and beyond just our normal tithes, even though we talked about that, but just how we give in other ways to people as well. And so what I found was it was the unity of the gospel, unity of the resurrection of Christ that they were teaching is what spurred them. It was their love of Christ, their love of people, which caused them to be unified in giving to others and providing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good stuff. And a lot of what we looked at this week is this idea of giving and generosity and how it's a heart thing. It's not a percentage thing, which I think we'd like to sort of say 10%, and put that on it and make it almost a new law, if it were only that simple. But
Yes.
It is not. It is not that simple. And so as you go through these questions this week, as usual, take as much time with each one as you want to. Don't feel like you've got to just chug right through them all. But if you do have time, or if you want to make sure that you kind of get to sort of the bulk of it, we'd like you to focus on questions 3 and 5. There's a lot of great stuff in those. So the first question, I'm just going to go ahead and read question 3 here. It says, what is the difference in giving what you can spare versus giving what you have? And that goes right to the point that Brian was just making. There's a lot to that. So speak to that point a little bit. What's the difference there? And how do we maybe apply that? And what can we discuss amongst the group to pull some of that out?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're really good at, and we've said this numerous times, we have a lot of sayings that we throw out there because they sound good, and we've always heard them. And one is, we always say, everything I have is not my own, until it comes time to decide what we're going to do with what we have. And so when I look at spare versus what you have, and you look at other giving passages, you look at the widow with her mite versus, the guys who walked up and dropped a little more in and they were noticed. it was a heart issue once again. But we were recognizing that parable, she gave much more because she gave out of everything she had. And so when it comes to giving what you have, none of this is ours. Everything I own, the clothes on my body are not mine, the house I live in, the car I drive, none of the things I own are mine. They're simply things that I've been able to obtain because God has, given me the opportunity to make an income and have that. But ultimately, it's all His. And so everything I have has to ultimately point back to worship. And part of worship is my giving and what I do with it. And so if all I do is hoard everything, and there's some of you that may be like that. You're always preparing for the rainy day, and I believe you have to. You have to have some of that. But you're always looking forward to not the rainy day, but the hurricane. And so you just stockpile it away. And you may not give to the church at all, not even the 10%. And you definitely sometimes don't even give to anyone extra that you hear of that's in need. And so that obviously is the extreme that way. But then the other extreme would be, as we're reading that took place here in Acts, they gave it all away. They weren't keeping anything. They were selling it all and giving the money like here. And it wasn't like they were going into poverty. They were still being taken care of because they were taking care of each other. They were going to each other's homes. And, it's an amazing picture, which is completely not something we would see in our society today. And yet in the middle is this group of people, and this is probably where a lot of us fall. Well, I have these means, I have these different things, but I'm only going to give this. I'm only going to give this a little bit. I'm only going to kind of set aside this amount. And that's where it gets dangerous, is if I'm only given what I think is worthy to be given, then I'm eliminating God from it. One of the things I've learned in my own life is I've talked about even this morning with the message, was how God worked in my own heart when it came to giving and what we needed to do. And it was a process. And so what we don't want you to do is say today, I'm going to go sell my home and give everything to the church. Probably not a good idea. But are you just giving out of a portion of what you have, or with all your heart? Is it good? It says in Corinthians, the actual word is giving cheerfully, like hilariously. Here it is. It's all yours. Just give it away. Because as you look at the premise of giving in the scriptures, it talks about wherever your heart is, your treasures, that's where your heart's at. The things that you accumulate eventually will be destroyed. A quick example, for Christmas, my son wanted an Xbox One. Oh, he was excited. He was ecstatic. It brought him contentment and happiness because that's what he wanted. And I know, because of just growing up, that in probably 5 to 6 years, it's going to be on a Hagerstown Yard Sale Facebook website, and because we're going to be on to the next thing. And so we accumulate those things for us, and we put our worth in that. But when we think about it, what is it that we give away? What is it that we give to other people? When we hear a need, do we give those things to other people and help them out? And that's the difference.
Yeah, that's good. And it's kind of a, like we said before, we want to oversimplify it and put a number on it or a percentage on it. And I guess I wouldn't say that it, starting at 10% is wrong. No, I think that's fine. As long as we recognize that it's about the heart issue. And so some people, I think God can call to say, hey, look, this is how much I've given you right now. I want you to trust me with 2%. Mm-hmm. Or not even necessarily track it, although it's good to do that because you can kind of just see what God's doing there. But whatever percent it would be, I was having a conversation with somebody this morning, and this still blows my mind, as somebody that I knew a while ago. I had been talking about them about giving and their philosophy behind it, and just sort of wrestling through that. Like, how do you do it? What do you, what are your convictions? And this guy said, he goes, well, we're not giving as much as we want to. We're working up to it. And I'm like, okay, what's your goal? And I'm like, do you do 10%? Do you do 20%? He goes, well, our goal is 90% giving, to live on 10% and to give away 90. And I'm like, you're in a whole different stratosphere as me. And he goes, we're only about 87%. I'm like, dude, I shouldn't even be in the same conversation with you, right? And you can't look at it like, okay, well, this guy's worth, God is more pleased with the guy who gives more money. That's not at all what it is. And when we look at the spare, what you can spare versus what you have, if you can honestly spare it without putting any faith, right? Like, if you've got way more than you need, and you're just like, let's say I've got $20 billion, and I'm like, okay, here's $100. Whoopity-doo, like, sorry. but there's no faith placed in that. And I think some part of the point is that if we're hoarding, like Brian said, there's nothing wrong with putting money away for a rainy day, but putting money away for 4 hurricanes might be a little bit of a lack of faith. God won't protect me, or God won't take care of me then, unless I save all this to take care of myself then. And there's a weird line there, and it might be good to talk about that and dig into how much of it is fear on our part that we don't give more, how much of it is good stewardship, because it's a fuzzy thing, but I think as individuals, God convicts us and moves us in that way.
Yeah, and one of the things I was thinking about when you were talking about that principle, a book that I know probably some of you have read that was out there was Radical, and great book. I enjoyed it. I respect David Platt, but I think the danger in that sometimes is because it's the same idea, going to that 90%. Don't, and I believe this is kind of what you're saying as well, don't put a number on it. Like if I hit that number, I'm super spiritual, or now I'm more Christ-like. The widow gave up her mite because it's all she had. We're not asking you to go to mortgage your homes today and go dump your cars and walk all around the tri-state area or anything like that. But what we're saying is, when you have, there's people always in need. I mean, as we talked about this morning in Deuteronomy, it said the poor are always going to be among you. When you hear the statistics, if the whole church would actually tithe, we'd wipe out poverty. But then less than 25% of the whole church does tithe, meaning the universal church, not just our local. So when you hear that and you go back and look at what they did in Acts, man, they got it. There wasn't anyone in need in it per se, because they were finding everyone and the apostles were helping them, because they saw that as more important than, well, I got this great house and I'm just going to kind of chill and sit here and, drink my Arnold Palmer and put up my sandals and watch everybody else do the work. They didn't do that. They were like, hey, we want to help everyone we can. And that's what we have to get to, is when you're in tune with Christ, you'll see the need and you'll want to meet the need. And you won't be asked to do it because you'll desire to do it. And I think that's really when you're giving.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a faith thing.
Yep.
Are we not giving in certain places because we don't trust God to provide? It's not a prosperity thing. It's not I don't know. There's so many wrong ways to look at that. I think that's absolutely well said. So that's good. So hopefully you can kind of spend some time in that, looking at that. And if you have any questions, it'd be a good thing to talk to us about. The fifth question on here kind of gets to the heart. It's sort of the opposite of that. It might help you kind of dig into that. It says this: is we accumulate stuff, and why is stuff so attractive? What stuff do you or we need to eliminate in order to serve others? And I guess the idea right there, in that we accumulate stuff, and why is it so attractive? What hole is that filling, right? So when we're presented with two options, I think this is kind of, you can jump in here, but
Okay.
We've got two options. We've got, I can give to somebody. It doesn't have to be the church. Like just, I'm gonna give in this sense as an act of worship to bring glory to Christ. Or I can take that same amount of money and use it for buying something. Right? I'm going to get a new whatever, and you're presented with those two options. Now we don't want to say every purchase you make, you better make sure that you shouldn't spend that money on this homeless guy. No, it's not like that. But when we have basically two options. Why is it so attractive to buy the stuff? Which again, we're not saying stuff is bad, but there's a pull to that kind of gets us off track, right? So.
Yeah, I think there's several things. The first one is we live in a culture that is taught about self-gratification. Get what you want, only accumulate what you desire, look out for your own interest, all these different cliche things they throw out.
Get all you can, sit on the can.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So we get all this stuff, and we never have enough stuff. And when we get something new, someone else gets something newer. So I go out and buy a car. And whatever that car is, it's a nice car. And next thing you know, my neighbor buys the newer model. And we're out there talking in the driveway one day, and he's showing me all the new bells and whistles on. And I'm thinking, I think I need to get the newer model because I need better stuff, because I don't have the good stuff. I got the old stuff. And so we just do. And we make it so accessible. I find it humorous when you go on mission trips, just the mentality of other countries versus the United States. Like we think we're all poor and, we're destined for failure. We're richer than a majority of the world. And so what do we have here? So maybe you go to a big store and you buy something big. But if you don't have enough money, go to one of the $800 stores that exist in the area and spend a little bit. And so at least you can get some stuff. You go to another country, you don't see dollar stores or Cologne stores or Cordoba stores if you've been to some of those countries. It's kind of interesting. Like, even though you may not have a lot of money, we'll find a way for you to spend the money you do have to get junky stuff. The other thing I've noticed is we accumulate stuff. And what we do is, and I always find this humorous, and I know some of you watching this, you're guilty of this. Good, be convicted, because I get a laugh out of it. You have this wonderful home, you buy these nice cars, and you have this beautiful garage these cars never fit in because you have so much stuff in the garage. It cracks me up is that, we can't put the nice vehicle and take care of it because we have so much stuff that's accumulated. And then you always have those moments where you're like, I want to finally clean it out. And then it becomes a walk down memory lane as you open box after box and container after container of stuff. And then what happens is you get a warm day, you put these folding tables in your driveway, and you have a yard sale to get rid of stuff. So you can make money to go buy more stuff.
And now you have room for more stuff. Yeah.
But when you go to another country, you don't see a yard sale on the side of the road. I mean, I have yet to ever see a yard sale in another country. And yet, we not only promote yard sales, and I was joking earlier, and I'm just as guilty of this, we can go online and make, I can't even think of the word now, I just lost it.
Acquire things?
Acquire things, yes, thank you. Oh, my goodness, it's been a long week.
Yeah.
So anyway, but we sell and we acquire more, and it's ridiculous. We can never have enough stuff. And the reason and I'm speaking personally here, the reason I always wanted more stuff is because I was never satisfied. And the reason I was never satisfied is because I bought into this premise of our culture, this stuff was going to make me happy. That I needed to have the huge home, and I needed to have the newest car, and I needed to have the newest items, and take the extravagant vacations, and have the high-paying job so I could buy more stuff and wear the certain amount of brand name clothing. Mm-hmm. Then it hit me, and as I shared this morning, God got a hold of my heart when it came to this issue. And so what I realized was stuff would never satisfy me. And when I finally realized it wasn't important anymore and allowed Christ to come into my heart and satisfy me, I've kind of lost some of my desire for the things that I enjoyed before. And we made some decisions, as I talked about, in our own family when it comes to that. And one of the things that I believe we battle is not only the mentality, especially us. Our generation grew up with the expectation just that you would have. Our parents came out of a successful generation where they worked and they had a lot, and we were spoiled. And we just believed that the moment we were out of college and got a job, we should have the same lifestyle.
Here's your stuff.
And so we just went for that lifestyle. And, more than probably any other generation, we love the plastic. And we would just get more stuff because we got so accustomed to that lifestyle that we just believed we deserved it. And that's the danger of it is, you become a slave to your debt. You become a slave to your stuff. And then what happens is you quit giving altogether, and giving is an act of worship. And so when you're not fully worshiping Christ with everything you have, including your giving, your spiritual life starts taking a hit. And you begin to question some things with Christ. And, you said you would do this, you would meet all my needs, and we distort all the scriptures. But we forget what he asked us to do on the back end in order for those things to happen. And so we find, these get-rich-quick schemes and think we'll make a quick dollar, and, so we can get more stuff and pay off the stuff we had. And, sadly, our giving is usually what takes the hit to us accumulating stuff.
Yeah, no, that's good. And to a large extent, it becomes our identity.
Mm-hmm.
It's where we find our value and our comfort. And we replace... our identity needs to be found in Christ. Obviously, He's our provider. He's the one that takes care of us. He's the one that gives us all that we need, both physically and emotionally, and obviously spiritually and mentally. Our focus is in on that. And when we just exactly like Brian's saying, we kind of grew up in that generation of like, hey, you're entitled to all this stuff, and if he has more stuff, then he's more valuable than you, and that is very much what our culture is screaming at us, and it's so not true. And so our identity becomes wrapped up in that, and I think also part of this is how it ties in with giving. where you're going to make a decision of, do I buy more stuff or do I give, or do I hoard it, do I save it? And again, we're not saying don't save money. That's not at all what we're saying. Just to the point of where you're relying on your money that God has given you for your protection and your stability. And you're relying on your stuff that God has ultimately enabled you to get, unless you've got like $40,000 in credit card bills, then he hasn't. You shouldn't have bought that, right? But that's, we kind of get into that point, and it can point, it's a good way to kind of for us to take a little litmus test there and look and say, where is my faith? Is my faith in Christ, or is my faith in myself or my stuff? And so spend some time talking about that, and it's okay if it gets a little uncomfortable. I think if we're honest with ourselves and self-reflective, a lot of us, not all of us, but probably you, but a lot of us, if we're honest, we have to say, yeah, man, there's some places where I'm kind of just trusted in my own ability or my own bank account, my own stuff that I've acquired, and the point you made about you could get a new car and like, man, this car is awesome. This is way nicer than any car I've ever had, and you're excited about it and maybe a little proud of it, which is that's all good. And then your neighbor drives in a nicer one, and suddenly your car stinks, and nothing has changed about it other than you're comparing. Yep. And that's an identity thing, and there's a window there into a place where we have yet to give over to the Lord, and that's a gift to see that, to look at that and say, okay, this is something that I need to reevaluate and look at. So, yeah.
Yeah, great thoughts. And, as you guys discuss, a great project maybe you can do is to help each other clean the garages of your stuff. So you can actually park the nice car in the garage. Yeah. It's one of those things, have a yard sale and give it to a missions organization. That way you don't, a lot of times we sell, we don't think, well, this is something I need to give. And so maybe a way to encourage you, I was just thinking as you were talking is, get rid of some of your stuff and say, who's someone I can give this to? An organization in the area, ministry in the area. Not necessarily FCF, but just someone who's doing something really cool that, kind of touches on your heart, something that you like. And just say, all right, family, this is what we're going to do. We're going to get rid of stuff so we can help someone else. And just kind of make it practical. And
that goes right into question 6. So do that. That's good. Yeah. All right. Right on.
Farther